Hey everyone. This is different, isn't it? So instead of me just, having my voice and like doing a regular video, I decided, how about you see my face? I hope you enjoy that. So you read the title of the video correctly. We are going to be talking about Twilight today. And I don't know if you guys know this, but I am a huge Twilight fan. Valentine's Day is coming up, and I decided, why not? Why not talk about, one of the most hated love stories of the 2010s, but also something that is near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about the fandom of Twilight, and also this thing called the Twilight Renaissance, which I don't know if you guys, really know about. But if you want like a really deep, all-encompassing view of like the history of the Twilight fandom, Sarah Zed just made an amazing video. She posted it like 2 days ago. I just finished watching it this morning, actually. I planned to do this video before she made her video, by the way. I was like, wow, what are the odds? I watched the whole video. I was afraid she was going to talk about the things I wanted to talk about, but she didn't actually. She just gave a very all-encompassing view of the history of Twilight and its fandom and how it started and then how it went away and then it came back and now it's totally different now in the pandemic. And that video is really great. So I'll go ahead and link her video down below. If you want like an all-encompassing like the history of the Twilight fandom, watch that video. It's amazing. It's very detailed. And it's a great listen. I was listening to it while I was like cleaning and stuff like that. But I'm going to actually be talking about love. So it's going to be Valentine's Day soon. And of course, we're going to talk about love and relationships and how that applies to Twilight, but also how it applies to Christianity. So for you guys who don't know me, if you're new to this channel, my name's Hannah and I lead Metamorphic Site Productions. I'm the department leader of Metamorphic Site Productions. And this is the YouTube channel that you're on, but also I'm a filmmaker and I make films. But on the YouTube channel, I analyze film and I talk about it through a Christian perspective. That's what this is going to be about, but it's also going to be about just Twilight in general. I have a lot to say about the subject. I felt like I didn't have to really prepare that much for it. Usually, like when I make one of these videos, I watch like marathons of films and I write a script and I gather all these examples. But for this subject, I felt like I didn't need to do that. I felt like I had a pretty good grasp on Twilight since I've been a fan since 2008. Yes, I've been a fan since the beginning of Twilight. So let's just jump into that, because before we get to what we're talking about, which is the love story of Twilight and, what does it get wrong, but really what it gets right. That's what we're really going to be talking about, is what Twilight gets right and why it's so attractive to people. I'm going to give you a small recap of basically how Twilight came to be. So in 2005, Stephenie Meyer published her first book, the Twilight series, just called Twilight, and it was about a human girl named Bella Swan who moves to Forks, Washington to live with her father, and she attracts the attention of a very attractive boy named Edward. And then things get really weird. And then she finds out that Edward's actually a vampire and he lives with a family of vampires. And that if she wants to continue to date him, there's going to be a lot of challenges because, for one, they're completely different. 2, he wants to kill her and drink her blood. And 3, Edward also kind of doesn't want her to ever become a vampire, and she does. And that's like a huge plot thing with the whole, that's like a big conflict between them for the whole book series. So Stephenie Meyer publishes this book, and for the first couple years, it's okay. It does pretty well. A lot of people actually like it. 2008 comes, they're going to make a movie, and they get Catherine Hardwicke as the director, and she makes the first Twilight film. And this is when Twilight became the phenomenon that we all remember it being. And I remember seeing the trailers for it, and I remember seeing the book all over everywhere, and I picked up the first book. I was like, I'm going to read it, and immediately I was hooked. I was 13 at the time. I was like the prime age to get hooked onto Twilight, and it got me hook, line, and sinker. So Twilight became super popular. It was like the movie of the year. All my friends got into it, and I just remember it was like this huge thing. You could go to Walmart, Target, Hot Topic, anywhere, and there was Twilight merch, and everyone was just like going crazy. So then we get New Moon. So I started reading the books, obviously, and I read the books well into the last book before I think even New Moon came out. I want to say that I got them all done before New Moon came out. And so I was already caught up on the story. But New Moon comes out and there's a new dynamic to the story. This character named Jacob is introduced. Well, he's introduced in Twilight, but he becomes a second love interest for Bella after Edward leaves in the second movie / book. Yeah, he just gets out of there. And it's explained later, like, why he left and why he comes back. But Jacob is like, this normal kid, and he really likes Bella, and he helps her kind of cope with being dumped and going through something that was really, really hard for her. But then he mysteriously starts changing, and you're like, why are you just like changing up your whole thing? And you come to realize, and you find out that he is actually a werewolf. So now Bella, the human girl, is stuck in between this love triangle between a vampire and a werewolf. And that is the ongoing conflict for the next 2 books, Eclipse and Breaking Dawn Part. Well, okay. For the movies, there's 3, but for the books, there's 2. The Eclipse and then half of Breaking Dawn is the whole love triangle between these 2. Bella is consistently like the person everyone wants to either be with or kill. And it gets to the point where Edward wins the love triangle and marries Bella. That's Breaking Dawn Part 1. They get married. They are whisked off to their honeymoon. Bella's like, I'm going to become a vampire. And Edward's like, fine, you'll become a vampire. I didn't want that to happen, whatever. And before she can become a vampire, she gets pregnant with the vampire baby. And this part, a lot of people are like, this doesn't make sense for the rules that Stephanie Meyer put in her universe. But she gets pregnant with a vampire baby. Okay, comes back, and it is growing very quickly in her womb. It almost kills her. She's like, I want to have this baby. She has the baby. There's this huge mounting tension with Jacob and his wolf pack. By the way, the wolves in Twilight hate vampires. It's very important. Vampires and werewolves are mortal enemies. Specifically just the wolves from Jacob's pack, though. It goes back this whole thing with this treaty with the tribe. But Bella has the baby, and Jacob falls in love with it. But this solves everything. All the problems are magically solved. And then it all wraps up, and Bella gets to be with Edward. She's married to him. She's now a vampire. She gets turned to a vampire. She is immortal. She's always young. She's always beautiful. She's always healthy. She has her daughter who will be immortal with her. And she gets to keep her friend Jacob. There's also some problematic stuff with that. And she is now part of the vampire Cullen family that she met in the first book. And that is the end. That is the real basic story. I left out a lot of big key plot points. It just was really harping on, like, this is what Bella goes through. There's a part in Eclipse that's kind of irrelevant where this vampire Victoria wants to kill Bella, and the werewolves and the vampires have to team up to fight against her. Eclipse to me is the most irrelevant book and movie. Like, when we watched it, yeah. Okay, so if you remember that, you're like, okay, yeah, this is a basic story. I remember Twilight. But if you also remember that Twilight had huge backlash back when it was first really, really big and really, really popular. There was this really popular meme that says that anything in the world is a better love story than Twilight. Here are some examples. And it just became this huge thing where Twilight was just bashed, and the people who loved Twilight were bashed, and they were saying you're stupid and vapid and dumb for liking this thing. And so I was into Twilight for like a hot minute, really, really into it, obsessed with it from like the ages of 13 to I think 14. And I had a rejection phase of Twilight. And a lot of fans actually say they had the same thing where they like completely turned their backs on Twilight and rejected it. For me personally, that happened when I was growing in my faith. And I don't really talk about this very often because I think people think this is weird, but this is the truth. I started to grow in my faith, and something about me being so obsessed with the book and with the story and with the movie, I was convicted in my heart to basically give it up. And that was actually just to give it up for a while. I thought it was like forever, but I actually made the decision to be like, okay, fine. I will just walk away from it. And supposedly this is what God thinks is the best thing for me. And that was completely like feelings based. I didn't know why I felt so convicted about it. Maybe it wasn't actually the Holy Spirit leading me. I just felt super convicted. I felt like I was way too into it. I I felt guilty about liking it so much. Maybe. I have no idea. But what I do know is that God did use it because I was very unhealthily obsessed with it. And also I was very blind because of my age to the problems in the story and the problems with the characters, which we're going to get into is what this video is really about. So after I rejected it, I kind of jumped on the bandwagon of hating Twilight and saying that it was, just as bad, horrible literature as everyone else, because I felt like I suddenly was belonged and I was seen as smart and cool. And this is a huge thing that is talked about with Twilight, and also just a common thing in the 2010s with this thing called cringe culture, which has finally been killed. I'm very happy about it. But cringe culture was this thing that was popular on the internet. It was very popular to look at people who were nerdy about certain things or just were huge fans or really loved something and called them cringy for liking it so much. If you were overzealous for anime or manga or Twilight was a big one, anything that was considered low tier back then, and if you showed that you liked it, you were mocked for it. It's so weird to say anime and manga now, because that's something that has become its own, it's so ingrained now in internet culture and just in culture in general. Like, there's so many people who love anime and manga, and it's considered a completely respectable medium to like. But there was a time where being a weeaboo was not great. There was a time when being, we called it otaku or whatever, you were made fun of and you were considered super cringy and super weird. But Twilight was definitely one of those things that was the victim of cringe culture, where it was just, people were just so hateful towards Twilight and the people who love Twilight, namely young teenage girls and their moms. That was pretty much it. They were like, oh, girls love this thing, it's stupid, we can't endorse it. And they were also mad that something like vampires, this genre, vampire novels have been going back for years and years, was changed by Stephenie Meyer in different ways. Everything I'm talking about, like I said, is talked very deeply in that video by Sarah Zed. I don't want to get too much into it because we're not talking about that right now. But basically the thing I'm saying is that Twilight, there's so much to talk about with Twilight. It was a huge cultural phenomenon. It was this thing that was a stamp of 2008 to 2012, mostly 2008 to 2011 really, or 2010. But it was a thing that happened that grabbed a lot of people's attention, either positively or negatively. And that has a lot to unpack. A lot of people talk about that. They talk about, the misogyny of just hating things that girls like for the sake of them being feminine, that these people were hating on Twilight so much because it was like a guilty pleasure for teen girls or whatever, and that they were just saying that it was stupid and that criticism wasn't deserved. And I would agree. I don't think the criticism is deserved that it's stupid or dumb just because it's not up to their standards of intellectual depth. I mean, that's just not cool. But there is something to say about how this fandom was polarizing and how it rose so, astronomically, and then it just fizzled out like a lot of things do. I mean, it just kind of went away for about, I'm going to say about 6 years for everyone else. For me, it was about 4 or 5. So I'll explain how I got back into Twilight in my later late teens, early 20s, and how it was right before the Twilight Renaissance. So in the summer of 2017, I believe, it might be 2016, I'm pretty sure it was 2017, I had to take summer classes at my university. I was in college, and they didn't have any housing at that point for people who were taking summer classes. They just were like, oh, we can't do housing. If you come to summer classes, you have to find housing somewhere else. And my friends, my very, very good friends, Rachel and Catherine, lived close to the university at that time. They lived in an apartment. And so I said, hey, can I just stay with you for a couple weeks while I take this one summer class? I can just kind of sleep in your living room and then I'll go back home. And they're like, yeah, sure. It's like a sleepover every night. We were just always watching movies, always hanging out. It was just like how we were when we were roommates when we first met. And one night we started talking about Twilight. And I, at this point, was like, you know what? I feel like I'm ready to kind of go back into Twilight and see what it was. I was nostalgic for it. I had grown a lot in my faith. So the fear I had earlier on about it being too bad or me being too obsessed with it or whatnot, I felt like I had a much better, mature headspace to like something and not let it overtake my life, and also to be critical of it. This is important, this part, to like something and also be critical of it. Those two things to be able to come together. That's a big thing for me and for every other Twilight fan. So we started watching Twilight. We marathoned them all that summer. And actually I'd never seen Eclipse Breaking Dawn Part 1 or Breaking Dawn Part 2 because I rejected Twilight right after New Moon came out. So I'd only seen Twilight and New Moon the movies. So it was my first time seeing Eclipse Breaking Dawn Part 1 and Breaking Dawn Part 2. And I just, something clicked inside me where I was like, you know what? When I was a kid, this was so important to me. I somehow got connected to this thing. And me being the analyzing brain that I am, I have to break down everything and be like, well, why? Why did I love this so much? And why do I still love it? There's something that really like speaks to me in this. And I'm like, you know what? I enjoy watching this. There's something that still like speaks to inner Hannah, little Hannah in there. And I want to continue watching it, but I also want to figure out like what it is. So that was like, I think the summer of 2017. I had gotten back into Twilight. I was ready to go back and kind of be a fan of it again. But I was like, ooh, this is going to be rough for a little bit. Because at the time, I mean, the Twilight fandoms were not around. They weren't big. They weren't huge. I had a Tumblr and I would check once or twice. I checked once that summer and I saw some posts and I saw some fan blogs but they weren't that big. And I was like, okay, whatever, that's fine. But 2018 happened and randomly I decided to search on Tumblr Twilight again. And I saw memes, but like not memes like making fun of Twilight. It was memes about Twilight, but by people who have had to have read the books to make these jokes. They were like inside jokes about Twilight. Things you would only know if you have watched the movies or read the books. A lot of them actually were about the books, like things I remember from reading them. And so that means that these people making these memes were fans. And I was like so perplexed by how all of a sudden this just kind of like bloomed out of nowhere. Sarah Zed in that video did make the connection for me, and she said that in 2018 that was the 10-year anniversary of the movie, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's also the year that Life and Death was published, so people had it in their minds like, oh, like Twilight, yeah, that was the thing, let's look back on it. For some reason, the fandom of Twilight, the people that my age that were little and loved it grew up and were like, you know what? We still love Twilight, but we can love it and make fun of it, but also not care if people think we're stupid or dumb for liking it. And that is what birthed the Twilight Renaissance. The Twilight Renaissance, the fandom just bloomed and blossomed again mostly on Tumblr. Tumblr is where it started. So there's this famous post. It's called the Effervescent Snail post. Basically, it was like one of the first Twilight meme posts, but it's the one that went the most viral, and it's like the most legendary of the Twilight memes. And I can't like show the person who posted it. They have a really like inappropriate name, but basically what the post says you're glad that Bella didn't have a cell phone back then, because your boy Edward would be just blowing that up with things like, I saw a snail today, effervescent, or something equivalent. That post, beautiful, phenomenal, amazing, gorgeous, whatever Lady Gaga says in that clip, that meme, I believe, started the Twilight Renaissance. I think it didn't really begin until that post was made and it became a heritage post. And I said it's a heritage post. It went viral. It's on multiple things, not just on Tumblr. I think it's iconic, and I think that it's important to internet history. So that's the basic, very small history of how we got from 2008 to now, and how Twilight has just like grown in its popularity again, specifically among old fans. So in 2020, I mean, it moved from Tumblr onto TikTok. TikTok has really made Twilight, like basically the mainstream. Didn't realize that this was happening until 2020, I believe, because then everyone in the pandemic was like, I need to make a TikTok. And then Twilight people were like, I got to make Twilight TikToks. Like, I got to do it. And they just became so popular, and people were suddenly realizing, oh, like Twilight has a very rich, wonderful fandom now. And that's why it's been more popular. And also Stephanie released Midnight Sun last year, just dropped that bomb on us. I remember it was crazy. I remember just one day being like, oh yeah, by the way, Stephanie Meyer is going to release Midnight Sun, and I pre-ordered it. I'm reading it right now. I should have been done with it already, but I'm reading it right now. And, holy cow. So yeah, that's how Twilight was rebirthed, its renaissance. So what are we talking about today in this video, other than, that Hannah's a big fat twihard? Well, I want to talk about love and what the Bible says about love, romantic love, familial love, brotherly love, and how it's represented or not represented in Twilight. So I'm really going off of the whole thing where people criticize Twilight for being a really bad love story. So we're going to talk about how bad or how not bad of a love story Twilight really is. So love. The Bible has a lot to say about love. I try to pick out verses that were relevant. I mean, they're all relevant, but like specifically I wanted to talk about, like God's love for us, romantic love. So like the love between a husband and wife, and then just the love of family and how that is reflected in the love of God. And the family one's actually very important, and we'll get to that at the end of the video. But I have some verses that we're going to put up on the screen here and I'll talk about. So the first one obviously is 1 Corinthians 13. This is like the definitive passage about love in the Bible. So love is patient, love is kind, it does not boast, it is not angry, it rejoices in the truth. That's all paraphrased. I'll put the full verse down below. But this whole passage is, one that is studied and looked over multiple times at churches and in Bible studies. And there's a whole thing about take love out and put your name in and see if you match up. Like, are you like love and things like that? I think the biggest thing to take away from this for our purposes is that love in this passage is all the qualities of God. And also it is truthful. Love rejoices in the truth. It does not rejoice in lies or in wickedness. So keep that in mind. Number 2, I picked Ephesians 5:22-33. If you are a Christian and you've gotten married, you've probably read this passage multiple times. The biggest takeaway, and I'll put like the final verses what Paul writes, is that the marriage, the love between a husband and a wife, reflects the relationship between Christ and the church. And it is a profound mystery. It's something that we, talk about in a lot at church about, marriage is supposed to represent our relationship to Jesus. But it paints this very intimate picture of our relationships to one another. I mean, it's saying that God, in his very nature, once he loves you, is the most intimate, most trusting, most important love, and that he gave us marriage as a human portrait of that. And our characters, Edward and Bella, get married in the movie. And it's also an important thing to think about, like, how is marriage portrayed in this film? And what does it say about love and marriage, which we'll get into a little bit later. And then John 3:16, the verse that everyone knows. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, that whoever shall believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. This verse, so God loved, so he loved, so he did this. And the things that he did, were commitment to people. He didn't just give up and destroy everyone. He made a way for them to be saved. Forgiveness. So not even wrongdoing or sin could separate God's love from those who would believe in his son. And finally, relentlessness. That God, there was no way, he made a way. He was relentless. He came after his church. He loved them. He loved them so much that he would stop at nothing to make sure that they could be with him. So these are some of the ideas and pictures the Bible gives of love, and they're always tied to God. God in his character is love. Like when we think of love, we're thinking about something that is, inherently tied to God and who he is. So after a little, biblical refreshment about like, what are we talking about when we talk about, love and Christianity, let's jump into Twilight and how Twilight represents romantic love and other kinds of love. And through this, I'm going to say why Twilight is attractive to a lot of people. First things first, Edward and Bella's relationship. Edward and Bella's relationship is the focal point of Twilight. It's also the thing that I think most people have written criticisms on. It's weird. Edward is 108 by the time we meet him in the books, and Bella is 17 already. But their relationship is, for both characters, their first relationship. And I guess in a way that is very reminiscent of like the teenage years. Like when you're a teenager, you usually get into your first relationship, and it's very crazy and powerful. And Stephanie has even said that that was part of the whole experience, was writing about first love. But there are some things that when you're that young, you don't recognize as being necessary for love, for true love. One of those things is knowing and realizing that people grow and they change over time, and that to have a self-awareness of, you know, where you're at, and also how to communicate that to the person you're choosing to love for the rest of your life. I'm talking about people you fall in love with and you get married to them, which is what Edward and Bella do. So it becomes very apparent as you read the books, especially when you read Midnight Sun. So I've been reading Midnight Sun now, and this becomes more and more between, you know, Edward and Bella, their relationship. You see both sides, that both characters are very blind to their state of being. They really struggle heavily with different psychological and traumatic things. So for Edward has gone through a lot. For one thing, he got turned to a vampire against his will when he was 17, and he's been 17 for, I think it was like 80, 90 years by the time we meet him. He never ages. He can't eat human food. He can't sleep. He has to go through high school over and over and over again for some reason. And he can read people's minds. It's a lot. It's a lot to go through. But he very unhealthily just blames himself for everything, and he kind of hates himself. He suffers from great self-hatred all the time. He thinks he's like the worst thing to ever exist. I just read a part in Midnight Sun where he is talking to Esme, his mother, adoptive mother, and she says, you know, do you blame Carlisle, for his adoptive father, for changing you? And he's like, no, I don't. And he's like, I honestly don't. And then he's like, okay, and then why do you blame yourself for becoming a vampire? And he's like, well, I mean, who else would I blame? If I can't blame Carlisle, then I guess I have to blame myself, which is like a very common trauma response, where you just go inward. You either go inward or outward when you experience trauma. Either it's somebody else's fault or it's your fault. This is reflected in how he views Bella. He views Bella as like this beautiful, amazing, angelic creature. He's absolutely infatuated with her and loves her. A lot of people argue this is because she's the only person he can't read her mind. So if he like knew what she was thinking, he wouldn't love her, which is harsh. I think that there's some legitimacy to how he, you know, sees who she really is and does in fact love her. But he just consistently sees himself as no good for her, and he hates that he can't keep away from her, and that he hates that he's such a monstrous person for falling in love with her. And he just continually poops on himself. Like he's always sad and he's always upset about being in the situation that he is. And we've noticed that from day one, and a lot of people complain about it. All in all, Edward suffers from a lot of mental and emotional baggage, but so does Bella. Bella is honestly the character that is most criticized and hated, and she's also the eyes of which we see most of the story. Stephanie Meyer has said, and I believe a lot of people have just come to the conclusion, that Bella exists to be a blank slate, basically a character that, you know, people who read the books can easily fall into, that they can put themselves in her shoes and, you know, be on her adventure, pretend to be her in Forks, Washington. But there are distinct things about Bella as a character. She has a past, she has family, she has likes, she has dislikes, and she has patterns of behavior that do make her distinct, but also relatable in a very specific way. So I didn't notice this when I first read Twilight, and honestly, it's because I didn't notice it in myself. I noticed it very accurately and very, you know, acutely when I reread Twilight and when I watched the films again. But Bella, most probably has depression. Bella moves to Forks, Washington to live with her father, and she doesn't really have a great relationship with him, and she doesn't like where she's moving to. She actually feels very out of place and very sad moving to a place where it's rainy and gloomy all the time, moving from a place where it's always sunshine. But there's another thing that's a part of Bella's character that contributes to how she has her relationship with Edward, and that is how Bella was raised by her mother, Renee. So Renee is a problematic character. She's someone that I don't often think about, but when I do, I get like feelings. Renee is Bella's mom. She's the ex-wife of Charlie, and she's also described as being scatterbrained and kind of flaky. Basically, she was a single mother to a child, and she didn't do a good job of it. Now, that's not saying anything about like, you know, being a single mother is very hard, but there's things that she did that were damaging to Bella. The main one being she just didn't care about Bella enough. She didn't care for Bella enough, really. So when we read Twilight, I'm going to use Twilight and Midnight Sun to explain this point more. When we read Twilight, Bella basically describes her being with her mom as, you know, her, Bella, the child, taking care of her mom. She says that she paid the bills on time, and she's the one who got herself up and ready for school, and she's the one who, you know, reminded her mother to do stuff, and she's the one who I think she cooked for her mom. I know she cooks for Charlie when she moves in with him. Basically, she does stuff that kids are not supposed to be doing. And also it's just implied that heavily that Renee is more concerned about, you know, her own interests than of Bella. She does ask Bella, or she does say to her in the very beginning of the Twilight book that she's like, you know, you don't have to leave. You don't have to go to Forks, Washington. You can just come along with me and Phil. Phil being her new husband and is a farm league baseball player, and he's being moved around a lot. And so Bella takes it upon herself to move to Forks, Washington to live with her father so that she can graduate high school so that her mom can live the life she wants to live. Yeah. She just decides that that's the best thing because she knows that her mom wants to do certain things and that it would just be easier if she was out of the picture. And her mom kind of fights her on it, but not really. When you read Midnight Sun, you start to learn more about how Bella was raised and about her childhood with Renee. So Edward asks Bella all these questions about her childhood and how she grew up. And Bella's like, yeah, I had a bedroom at my mom's house. And he's like, oh, you had a bedroom? And she's like, yeah, well, it's her yoga studio now. And he's like, well, what about when you go back? And she's like, oh, we'll probably just push the bed in somehow. And he's like, well, you have an extra bedroom, right? And he's like, oh yeah, that's her craft room. Like, it's impossible to put anything in there. And you just kind of get the picture that Renee doesn't take the time to really care about and for Bella's needs and wants. And this is reflected in very much how she acts. So when she moves to live with her father, Charlie, who tries very hard to be a proper father, he like keeps her bedroom. She doesn't even live there, but he keeps her bedroom just the way it is. Oh, she always has like a bed to sleep. She has a place to stay. He's overjoyed when she comes to live with him. He tries to be fatherly towards her and protective, but she takes on the role of cooking dinner every night. She decides that, you know what, that's like what I need to do because that's how I've been raised. I'm the one who takes care of my parents, and I'm the one who has to do things like that. And she also has this mindset that she can just kind of be independent and do things that she wants to do. Like, it's very apparent the more that she is swept up into this life of like with vampires and werewolves, and how she just kind of ignores Charlie. She very much cares for her father, and she makes sure that he is kept safe. She makes sure that he's safe, and she doesn't want anything bad to happen to him. That's a part in all like 3 of the books where she's like, hey, like this could end up bad for my dad. Like he could get in trouble, he could get hurt. But at the same time, she kind of doesn't care about like how he feels like about her decisions. And I think it's not because she doesn't care about her dad. It's because her mom never cared about her decisions or cared about what she wanted or what she was doing in a way that like a parent would. And so she doesn't like realize what she puts Charlie through because she was with Renee for so long. So because of this, because you have Edward, who went through this huge trauma of like literally being changed. His parents died in a horrible pandemic. Haha, very relevant now. And he, became something he thought was monstrous. And then you have Bella, who, is basically from this background of being an adult child, like I forget what the term is that it's usually called for that, but like probably being the child of possibly a narcissistic parent. I don't know. I don't feel like Renee is at that point. She's not like that toxic, but she's at the point where she's at least neglectful, like a neglectful, emotionally neglectful childhood. You get, I would call it a codependent relationship. I would think that Edward and Bella, especially in the beginning, show a lot of signs of codependency. That and it's weird because when we first look at the relationship, we see it through Bella's eyes, and a lot of people see as Bella as being the codependent one, that she's like so reliant on Edward, that she's so attached to him that she just can't leave him and all this stuff. There was even this fan theory that Edward was like, how vampires can control people's minds and hypnotize them, that Edward was actually hypnotizing Bella every time he talked to her so that he could like have her as his vampire bride. And like before Midnight Sun came out, that theory sounded very legit. I went back through the first book of Twilight on audiobook about a year ago, and I remember reading that theory and like listening to that audiobook, and I'm like, it makes so much sense. And then after you read Midnight Sun, you realize that that's not true, that didn't happen. But people looked at Bella's codependency and they saw it as weak and fragile and crazy and a really bad role model for the girls that were reading this book. But in reality, it's very true to what happens to a lot of people. Like a lot of people enter codependent relationships because they don't have the self-awareness to realize that their attachment styles or the way that they view people or themselves is because they had a parent that wasn't there for them in the way that they needed them to be, or because they experienced, great trauma that they've never really worked through, or they don't acknowledge, or they cope with it in a way that's very unhealthy. So it is kind of realistic. Is it great? No, it isn't great. Their relationship is definitely codependent. But they do grow out of it, though. They do grow out of it. I will give them that like as time goes on, and really as Bella goes through the story, she changes and grows. And that's a big part of the whole story of Twilight. It's mostly Bella's story, and we'll get into that. But codependent relationships are not biblical. So a big thing about codependent relationships is that they're enabling. Codependency is also about, feeling like you have to rely on your partner, feeling like they're your one and only, the only person for you. Like you like being with them is the only thing that helps you, because that person gives you that false sense of security when really they're just not helping you grow at all. Like you want to be stuck and that person lets you be stuck, so you stay with them. C.S. Lewis has this quote. He says that to love somebody is to will their highest good. And what that means is that when you really love somebody, you do what's best for them, even if it's hurtful, even if it's hard, even if it's painful, even if that put a strain on the relationship. Codependent relationships don't want the relationship to end. They don't want a strain there. They don't want any threat to the relationship. And so they just, anything that could threaten that, they either let be, they don't bring it up, they don't stir the pot, or they actively avoid it or ignore it. But a biblical relationship, biblical love, is one that confronts the problems because it's the best thing for the other person. It's realizing that the real relationship is one where you support and help grow your partner, and not one where you enable them. So Edward weirdly tries to do this, and I'm not going to defend. Kind of. his decision to leave in New Moon is I think something that reflects the willing the higher good for the partner. So in New Moon, the second book in the series, Edward leaves Bella, and it's revealed in Midnight Sun that he actually planned to do this like before the whole thing with her birthday party. So in New Moon, Bella turns 18. She turns 18, and they go to her birthday party. They have a birthday party for her, and Jasper, which is Edward's adoptive vampire brother, almost accidentally kills Bella. Basically, she gets a paper cut, and the blood lust, he can't control it, and he almost kills her. And right after that, Edward leaves Bella, just like leaves her. He's like, okay, we're done. We can't do this anymore. I don't want you anymore. We're done. And it's revealed later that he did that because he thought that he was bad for her. His lifestyle, who he was, once again, going back to his self-hatred, but also because he put her in danger, and feels like he continues to put her in danger by being in her life, and decided that the best thing for her, to give her back her life, but also to keep her safe and to keep her human, he thinks the best thing for her is to be human, is for him to leave, which is sacrificing what he really wants for her better good. Was it the right decision? Probably not. He was very misguided. Well, okay, it wasn't misguided. I feel like he had the right intentions, but I don't think he was really thinking it through about what was the best thing. Was it the right answer? I don't know. I don't think so. In the universe of Twilight, I think that like Edward and Bella should be together. But he at least was in the right. He was at least in the right headspace. He was on the right focus. And that's where I meant where they start to grow. So there are mentions of them growing in their relationship. After Bella becomes a vampire, there's a conversation they have. So they have their vampire baby, and the vampire royalty called the Volturi want to destroy their vampire baby because they think that it's an abomination called an immortal child. It's a big thing in the lore. But there's a conversation that Edward has with Bella, and he says, I'm really sorry I've underestimated you. Every time I've underestimated you, and every time you've proven that, you're more than that you're strong, that you're capable. And it does show how they grow. I mean, a lot of people, I think, completely skip over that, but Bella changes a lot in the series from where she was in the first book to where she ends up. And Edward does notice that, and he does appreciate that, and he does help her grow as time progresses on. So it starts very codependent and starts very bad, and it gets better. As we get to the end of the series, it does get better in that regard. Okay, so how about the other love triangle relationship? Bella and Jacob. My look of discomfort is not from, because I'm Team Edward. It's because Jacob was done dirty. A lot of people have a problem with this. So when we first meet Jacob, he is a young, shiny, forgive the pun, golden retriever-like boy, where he's just like, has a puppy crush on Bella. Goodness, I'm using really bad puns. I'm very sorry. He has this little like crush on Bella. He's like 16 years old. He loves working on cars and motorcycles, and he's just like a kid. And both in Twilight and Midnight Sun, he's just like a normal kid that is really cool. And he's the least problematic person who likes. Well, okay. Yeah, at the beginning, he's the least problematic person that likes Bella. And then New Moon happens, and he continues to be that. When we first meet him again, so Bella goes into an even deeper depression once Edward leaves her. She gets like almost, is it catatonic? Is that the word I'm looking for? Where she doesn't do anything. She barely gets out of bed. She doesn't talk to her friends. She just kind of goes through her days and goes back to sleep. And she finds solace in being friends with Jacob. Jacob basically helps her have fun again. And at this moment, a lot of people were like, yeah, Jacob's really cool. Like maybe this is the best thing. Maybe this is a weird 180 where we thought we had one love story, but then we're getting this other one. Everyone knew Edward was going to come back and that they were going to end up together. But when you reread the books, especially when I reread the books, in the beginning, Jacob seems like a better choice. and then he turns into a werewolf. There's a lot to be said about the whole thing with the indigenous people in the book and the movies being the werewolf pack, them being animalistic and highly emotional and also very violent some points where they could accidentally hurt people. So this is one of the biggest complaints about Twilight, and there's a lot to be said about how the native people are treated in the books and in the movies. But that's a whole other topic for a whole another day. We're just going to talk about how David. We're just going to talk about how Jacob is portrayed. So Jacob becomes a werewolf, and because he's a werewolf, he has the ability to transform into a giant wolf. He becomes way more moody. That's like a big part of it. He becomes way more emotional and like angry. And then also he gets wolfy telepathic powers. So he can read the minds of his fellow wolf pack members. So because he can read the minds of his fellow wolf pack members, he is like all up in this drama with the leader of his pack named Sam and these two girls, Leia and Emily, who are cousins. So Sam used to date Emily. No, sorry. Sam used to date Leia, and then he turned to a wolf, and he did this thing called imprinting on her cousin Emily. Imprinting is like forced soulmate. So it's like the wolf person sees, by the way, the wolves are always supposed to be male, but there's an exception. Leia becomes a werewolf, and she's the only female werewolf ever to like exist. Male wolves will see like a woman and be like, oh my gosh, like she's the perfect mate for me, match. And I think it's mate. I think it's like something about them having the strongest offspring, which is questionable. And they just immediately fall in love with them. And then the other girl is destined to fall back in love with them. So yes, that happens. And this is actually, it comes up in the finale of the whole series. But also with Jacob becoming a werewolf, he learns that his tribe's legends about cold ones or about vampires, specifically the family of the Cullens, are true. They really are vampires, and they are the mortal enemy of his wolf pack, of his tribe, supposedly. Which also means that Bella, the girl that he is in love with, was with the vampire boy. And he just gets so angry about this, and he gets very jealous, and he gets very toxic masculinity-ish about it. And all throughout New Moon, he's trying to win Bella. He's trying to like, oh, it's me, I'm the good boy, but he's no longer the good boy. He's very angry and bitter and secretive and hot-headed, and he just changes completely from who he was, the person that Bella actually started to fall in love with. And we did too. We started to fall in love with the original Jacob, and then he became the werewolf. And then at the end of New Moon, this whole thing happens where Edward thinks Bella died, and then he wants to die, and so she has to go to Italy to save him. And that's when Jacob is like, no, like you love me, like choose me. And all of Eclipse and all of Breaking Dawn part 1 is that. He is very insistent and pushy about, like that he is the better choice. Even to at one point where he forcibly kisses Bella, which is not okay. The relationship between Bella and Jacob is not really a relationship, in my opinion. I mean, Bella always saw it as a platonic friendship, and Jacob wanted more. And while that can go back into the whole thing we talked about with being relentless, God relentlessly pursues us, we know that love is something that cannot be forced. It's something that one has to choose to do. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people believe we had free will in the garden. We couldn't just be forced to love God. We had to, choose to do so. But the whole idea of imprinting that is so huge in the werewolf storyline takes away that free will. And it's something that, really plagues Jacob for a lot of his story. He thinks about what is being forced into love. But then it happens to him. The most problematic thing that happens in Twilight yes, but it's something that could have been explored much more. Like Stephanie Meyer does go into it a little bit. I mean, Jacob and Leia have a very deep conversation about imprinting and how it has affected their lives since they've become werewolves. Actually, I thought, and I haven't made a TikTok series about this, but I actually thought that Jacob and Leia were going to end up together when I first read the books, mainly because how their stories mirrored each other and how they seem to be the characters that reject the idea of like true predestined love and like that you can build a relationship on something other than just like intense, passionate infatuation. I really was hoping that would happen because it is shown that Leia cannot imprint because she's the only female werewolf, and that Jacob is in a love triangle where he is rejected just like Leia was rejected by Sam, and this whole thing where I thought for sure like they could make a great couple to kind of be a foil, like a little bit of another side to love than like Bella and Edward. Okay, finally, Bella's relationship with herself. I don't think a lot of people talk about this. I've seen a couple think pieces on it. I've seen a couple Tumblr posts on it. And we mentioned it a little bit when I talked about Bella having depression. But Bella's relationship with herself is one of the relationships, if not the relationship, that grows the most in the book series. So when Bella first starts out, she doesn't think about herself like at all. And a lot of people say, well, that's good. She's selfless. And no, I think she's neglecting herself because she was taught to do that by her mom. She has a trouble with letting people in. She has trouble making friends. And the more that I read the book, especially now knowing of my own depression and my own mental illness, it was easy to see that she did have depression. She was sad in her life. She felt like she couldn't get her needs met, or she didn't even know what it was like to have her emotional needs met. She didn't feel comfortable in her own body or her own skin, and she didn't feel comfortable being around people. And when she got into a situation where it was better for her, I mean, she got the attention of people at school. She was able to talk to people. They wanted to talk to her. They wanted to get to know her. She had a parent that wanted to be a parent. She didn't know how to handle it. She didn't know how to be loved. When Bella first meets Edward and when she first realizes she's falling in love with him, she does become desperate. She becomes desperate and codependent upon him because he's meeting an emotional need that she never even realized was there. He is someone who is just caring about her. Like, he just wants to be with her. He just wants to know her. He just wants to, hold her hand and be there and really get to know who she is. And she's never seen that before. Also, Bella deeply struggles with boundaries. Probably another thing from her mother or the way she was raised. She doesn't have a lot of boundaries concerning herself or her safety. Edward constantly brings this up and mentions it. And he's like, you're never concerned about your own safety or even like your own feelings. When he's trying to read her mind and he reads the people's minds around her and her conversations, which is, creepy, but it's his life, that of him reading minds. He notices that she is always trying to have other people feel good. Like, she's always trying to be kind to them and be nice to them and let them know that, it's okay and that she cares. And I think in the Twilight book, it comes off more of like she just wants to like not talk to people, which is kind of weird. It's like goes back to that theory that if Edward was able to read her mind, he might not think so highly of Bella. But it is true, like, she doesn't really understand how to have clear, concise boundaries, emotional boundaries with the people around her. Either she's completely distant, she doesn't want to really be buddy or friends with people, even people like Angela, like someone like Angela, who's a background character, but someone that she probably would have become really, really good friends with if she could realize or recognize, like, true intentions or honesty. It's claimed that she is able to do this with Edward, that she sees his good qualities past all of the bad, and that's one of the reasons why they're destined for each other, that she's able to, see the goodness in him even when he can't. And I would say that's true, but it's kind of like a rare thing for her. She has trouble seeing people who are good for her and people who are bad for her. And she kind of just blocks everyone away and keeps them at arm's length, except for her mom. because that's what she's trained herself to do, to protect herself. She doesn't really know if anyone really has good intentions for her. So when Edward gets into the picture and she finally finds someone she wants to genuinely be around, who genuinely wants to care about her, who she does see the goodness in, even if it's, there's some problems there that she's not easily being able to identify. She just puts herself in harm's way because she's so desperate for this love. Yeah, it does make sense with the relationship she has with herself. She has trouble with boundaries. She has trouble with trusting people. She has trouble with letting other people care about her and take care of her because her mother was not good at that. It makes a lot of sense as to why she's so enraptured with Edward, because it all just kind of perfectly fits, kind of perfectly and kind of horrendously, like the things she was searching for that she didn't know she was searching for, didn't even know that she wanted or needed. But it doesn't end there. So before I go on with Bella's relationship with herself, I'm going to switch into what does Twilight get right? We've talked a little bit about what it gets right, and we've talked a lot about what it gets wrong. But now I'm going to talk about what does Twilight get right about love, and why is it so attractive to some people? And I think one of the big things is Bella's transformation. And I'm not just talking about her transformation from human to vampire. I'm talking about her character transformation from someone who looks at themselves as weak and kind of meaningless and worthless and, not deserving of love or people's time, to a very confident and strong and loved and loving individual. There is growth there. The more that Bella starts to feel out this idea of becoming a vampire, but also the more she interacts with the Cullens, and even with the wolf pack and things like that. Bella's transformation into this more strong character that I'm talking about really comes from her interaction with the Cullens. And I think that this is the core, the quintessential thing that is attractive about Twilight, and that is the found family trope. The found family trope is basically this idea that, your family doesn't have to be the people you're related to. It can be the people that you love. Usually in found family movies, there's a group of misfits that end up coming together for whatever reason and acting like a family. A very famous movie that does this is Lilo and Stitch. Lilo and Stitch is all about finding family. So if you're unfamiliar with Twilight, the Cullens, like I mentioned before, are a family of vampires, but they're not a related family of vampires. They are a found family of vampires. So their dynamic and how they formed the Cullen clan, or the Olympic Coven, I don't know if anyone remembers calling them that, is, I think, one of the reasons a lot of people fell in love with the series. The Cullens' backstories are that, Carlisle Cullen was a priest / vampire hunter in 1600s England, and he accidentally gets turned into a vampire, and he swears he'll never drink human blood. He doesn't want to kill anybody, so he finds out that he can drink animal blood and survive on that instead, and so that's what he does. Becomes a doctor to save people because he wants to spend his eternal life on Earth helping people. And he comes across Edward and his mother, who are dying of the Spanish influenza. His mother begs him to save her son, and he changes Edward into a vampire so that he can not die. And so then Edward's is vampire son at that point. And then a couple years pass, and Carlisle ends up saving this woman named Esme, who tried to kill herself because her child was dead or killed. And she was so heartbroken over it. She was also from an abusive marriage. So he changes her into a vampire, saves her life, and they fall in love and become Mr. and Mrs. Cullen. And then right after that, I think Esme was second. And then after that was Rosalie. Rosalie had a tragic backstory as well. She was this socialite, and she was basically assaulted and almost beaten to death by her fiance and some other guys, and Carlisle saved her. She was with the family for a while. She found Emmett, her mate. He was attacked by a bear, in like the mountains of Tennessee and almost died, and she fell in love with him and saved him. And then later on, Alice and Jasper come and join. Alice has premonitions of the future. She could foresee that the Cullens are out there and that her and Jasper were going to join them. So they go and find them and join them. And so all these weird vampires who are just like these different like walks of life from different time periods, who don't want to be monstrous vampires. They don't want to drink human blood. They want family. They want a semblance of human life, come together, and they become very loyal and dedicated to one another, and they become a found family. And it's through like Bella's interaction with the Cullens that she kind of realizes what she's missing. This is going to sound such a weird thing, where I'm going with this. But I think that the reason why the Cullens, as a found family trope, and by extension, kind of the werewolves too. Technically the werewolves are related. They all come from the same tribe, but they are like a family of misfits, because they're the only people that can turn to wolves. The Cullens are more so because they're by choice. They're together by their own volition and choice. This is attractive because it's reminiscent of the love that Christ brings to his followers. What I know you're like, what are you talking about, Hannah? But like how the Cullens act is, I think, how church should be. So they are a family of people who have a common belief system. So they are a family of people who live radically different than the rest of their kind. And they do it for a specific reason, but also they want to have family. They want to conscientiously love one another and be there for each other. Side note, this could also be something that is from Mormonism. So I do want to do a video eventually talking about the Mormonism in Twilight, because Stephenie Meyer was Mormon. She's not Christian. So there are some things that can like overlap, that my Christian interpretation, how I see things, could kind of be Mormonish. The love shown by the Cullens in this way is so endearing and attractive because it's reminiscent of God's love. I mean, it's reminiscent of what the Bible talks about, and what Paul writes in his multiple letters about how you should love one another, how we should support one another, how we're now a family under Christ. And that, is something that we choose to do, that we take up our cross every day and we choose to do this. We choose to be a family. We are made a family by Christ. Like he's obviously the connecting bit here. He is the hub of the wheel. His blood is what connects us all and makes us a family. It's not just like we decide, okay, we're going to do this. But there's also the whole thing of choice. Like we have to decide to show up and be a church as well, of, having that choice of being a family and being a found family. People who are committed to one another, not out of like just some biological obligation, but out of love. Yeah, I think that is one of the biggest things about Twilight that a lot of people find comfort in. I think that it goes overlooked, but I also think it's why Bella grows so much. The most obvious time we see Bella grow the most is when she literally transforms into a vampire in Breaking Dawn Part 2, or in the last part of Breaking Dawn the book. She dies to her old self. Her old self is dead, and she wakes up a new self with a perfect body, and she's immortal. Like I said, a lot of this is also Mormon. There's Mormon ideas in there, but this is also can be interpreted as Christian. Like I said, you have the old self dying, and then the rebirth and the immortal eternal life. But also that Bella is now in a family, a dedicated, loyal family, a place where she is completely like everyone else and belongs and feels like she belongs and wants to belong and wants to be there. This is, I think, something that at least for me resonates strongly. Whenever I watch Breaking Dawn Part 2 and I see her wake up and she just can run and jump and she's just so elated to have this life now. And then later on in the movie, when all this stuff happens and she's really the loyalty and love of her family is really put to the test, and they show up for her. I mean, it all just kind of culminates in Bella being someone who is now able to be loved and love back because she found a family. And if we go off of this as like, how is this reminiscent of God? It's very reminiscent of God. Like, a lot of times Christians will complain that they don't feel loved by God. For a long time, I felt like I didn't feel loved by God. I felt like God was, a distant thing. I thought he wasn't really here with me. I thought he was just like over there, and that my job was to worship him and to serve him and do everything. And, yeah, he loved me, but I just had to know that. I don't know if I could feel it. It wasn't until I really reached out and got involved with my fellow believers and I found my church that I realized that a lot of times the way that God loves us, and also through my husband getting married, going back to our whole point about marriage and being a reflection of Christ in the church, God very often wants to love us through the people in our lives. Like, that's why he calls us to love one another, because he wants us to show others his love. Like, he wants to be a part of our relationships. And that, church is supposed to be a family. It's supposed to be that home. Whenever I think about how I've grown in the past like 2 to 3 years, I think about all the times that my church has come through for me. I think of all the times that I've had really hard talks with people I trusted, who I was like, you know what, these people are my friends. I didn't feel like I ever had friends before, but these people say they want to be my friend. And they've proven it to me because, we share the love of Christ, and that God is showing me his love through them right now. That was changing for me. And when I rewatched Twilight and when I saw all of that go down with Bella and the Cullens, that's what I was feeling. It felt like it was reflected in the screen, that this character was also going through what I was going through in that way. So I think that's why people love Twilight a lot. Yeah, there's the mood. Yeah, there's the aesthetic. Yeah, there's the blue tint. Yeah, there's the soundtrack. I mean, like, the soundtrack is highly important, I understand. But I think that's what really makes people comfortable, is this idea of just feeling like you are very sad and you're very overlooked, and then finding home is kind of at the core of Bella's journey. More so than falling in love with Edward and getting married to him. It's more of like coming into her own, and also realizing that she too can be a part of a real family. Don't get me wrong, I stand Charlie. Charlie's an amazing father. He's an amazing dad. And he did give Bella an amazing family, and Renee loves her daughter too. But you understand what I was saying, hopefully. So to wrap it up, I guess the last thing I want to talk about is the happy ending. It's another reason why people love Twilight so much, and kind of going back to what we just said about the found family trope. So a lot of people were like, oh, happy endings, they're not cool. They're supposed to have ambiguous, sad endings. Not always. So seeing Bella go through this really hard time. I mean, she goes through about 2 to 3 years of just constant conflict, and also just constant reevaluation of herself and like her place in, this world, and like, where do I choose? Do I choose to become a vampire? Do I choose to stay human? Is really reflective of like, do I choose to stay the same, or do I choose to grow? Bella chooses to grow. She chooses to change. And when she chooses to change, she gets to be happy and loved. And that's rewarding to see. It is rewarding to see someone go through so much growth and then get to be happy and loved. That's what we want. But it also adds on that happiness, joy, and love are all found in God, that he is those things, and that there was no way to get to him, and then Christ made a way. That was his relentless, forgiving, patient, kind, amazing love that made it possible for us to grow and become, better and become more like him, but also be with him. Christ made a way for us to be alive again after being dead, and then to be loved by him, which is technically the ending of Twilight. So yeah, the happy ending. I think people resonate with it because it's a very deep spiritual thing. So that was my very long video. I don't know how long it's going to be. I just spent like 3 hours filming this. I hope I can get it down about Twilight and, what it talks about with love and relationships, but what the Bible talks about love and relationships, and how Twilight kind of gets it right and then how it kind of doesn't. So I do want to talk about Twilight again, because there's a lot to talk about. Like I said, it was such a huge phenomenon, but also the movies are very interesting. There's some things to dive into. But no, thanks for listening to me. Thanks for going on this journey with me. So that'll be it for me, guys. If you want to become a supporter of mine, you can go to my Giving Fuel page down below and sign up to be a supporter. That would be amazing, and join the M.S.P family and get my newsletter and just get more updates about our content. We'll have a new podcast out by next month. And yeah, happy Valentine's Day. Watch Twilight, eat chocolate. Heck yeah.